Thanks, Heather. So the title of today's webinar is A Beginner's Guide to Manual Auditing, Going Beyond Automated Scanning. And I am Hope Allwine. I work here at Accessible Web. So what we're going to be covering is we're going to do some basic definitions up front and then start diving into what's the difference between automated scanning and manual audits, followed by kind of a comparison, direct comparison between automated scanning and manual audits. And then what do you need to complete a manual audit, as well as a checklist before performing a manual audit. And then we'll wrap it up with a few easy tests to start your manual audit and also some tips and tricks for keyboard tab navigation during your manual audit. All right, let's get started. So we're going to start with some definitions. So first, what are the guidelines used for both automated scanning and manual audit? Is the Web Content Authoring Guidelines, or WCAG. That is how I pronounce it. That may not be correct, but that is how I pronounce it. And it is designed by the Web Accessibility Initiative, which is a branch of the World Wide Web W3C consortium. So WCAG has 3 levels of conformance: A, the minimum level; AA, often used when performing audits; and AAA, which is exceeding expectations. There are 3 main versions in effect now. There's 2.0, 2.1, and 2.2. Most legislation refers to 2.1 AA conformance level, but we generally recommend here at Accessible Web to go ahead and do your manual audits with 2.2 AA. That way you're one step ahead of the game. Also note that even though there are multiple versions available, they are all backwards compatible. This means success criteria from 2.0 are still applicable in 2.2. There are some criteria that have been removed over the course of time, like parsing. So you definitely want to double check into the different versions before you get really into a manual audit. So our next definition, what is automated scanning? So automated scanning is software designed to programmatically evaluate a website or web application against the technical standards, which is WCAG, and catch any technical errors within the code or identify missing components needed for accessibility. It's a great way to get started with accessibility, but it doesn't cover every success criteria. Our next definition is, what is manual auditing? So manual auditing is a human-driven assessment of web content, that could be a website or a web application, where a tester goes through all of the WCAG criteria. The number of tests and criteria is determined by the level of conformance and WCAG version. For example, if you're doing a 2.2 AA audit, you will have 55 success criteria to meet. So the tester in manual auditing also utilizes assistive technology like screen readers to ensure that all components have equal access to the same information. That wraps up this slide, and let's get into what is the difference between automated scanning and manual audits. I wanted to read this quote from the Web Accessibility Initiative's resource for selecting accessibility evaluation tools, as it best answers this question. Tools cannot check all accessibility aspects automatically. Human judgment is required. Sometimes evaluation tools can produce false or misleading results. Web accessibility evaluation tools cannot determine accessibility. They can only assist in doing so. So definitely keep that in mind as we advance to our next slide, where we're doing a comparison of automated scanning versus manual audits. So here's some major differences between the two. With automated scanning, it really only covers between 35 to 40% of testable components, meaning it can't test all of your success criteria within WCAG. Some have to have a human input. Automated scanning is limited in its capabilities while it's testing. For example, it can't expose hidden content like activating a dialog modal or testing all of the different contrast requirements. There are some advantages to automated scanning, as it can test larger batches of pages quickly and identify some low-hanging fruit, like the absence of a main landmark or if you're missing some form fields. Automated scanning is a great starting point, but it can only achieve so much, which is why manual auditing is recommended for a more in-depth look. Now let's look at manual auditing. So the key difference is the presence of the human element, as manual auditing cannot be performed without a human tester. It is human-centric, as manual auditing is with testing the product with human judgment and understanding the nuances of user behavior. Next, manual auditing is comprehensive, as testers are testing all components and their interactions with each other. This ties into the human-centric point, as humans can find various ways to achieve the same goal and make the judgment on which path is the best for them. Manual auditing does require a dedicated time requirement, as it can be cumbersome if the page has a lot of interactive components, such as if you have a filtering component for a data table. It can also take more time, as evaluating relationships between components like labels and their form fields can get a little complex, but it also depends on how it's coded. This ties into the next point of manual auditing requires a level of technical knowledge of WCAG, HTML, CSS, and other programming languages like JavaScript. I use the term creative coding, as there's no one way to make a component work. For example, a column can be created with a layout table or a CSS grid or using a Bootstrap framework. In the end, it all looks the same on the front end, but in the back end, it can vary greatly. Lastly, manual auditing does require the use of assistive technology during testing. It may not include all types of assistive technology, as there's quite a few out there, but testing with the basics like screen readers is invaluable, as it puts the tester in the shoes of users with disabilities and ensures the same information is portrayed. For example, if instructions are only available in a visual way, is that information available somewhere else for assistive technologies to present that to the user? All right, so that wraps up a basic comparison of automated scanning versus manual audits. And let's advance next to our checklist before you start your manual audit. Before we get into the meat of manual audits, there are a few items to address prior to gathering your tools for a manual audit, including scoping. Scoping refers to a representative sample of your high traffic pages or content that is repeated across several pages. For example, if you've got like a widget that has frequently asked questions on several pages, that's definitely something you might consider for your scoping whenever you're starting your manual audit process. So this helps determine the pages and components that are frequently used. It could be your checkout page or a shopping cart widget, and it also gathers that representative sample of representative sample of pages. Like if you have multiple product pages, you might want to just pick one for your manual audit. Our next point is knowledge and teamwork. You probably already know who does what within your organization, but it is important to gauge everyone's level of knowledge and comfort when it comes to accessibility. The key to good teamwork is knowing strengths and weaknesses and keeping up clear lines of communication within an organization's hierarchy. Before you start a manual audit, make sure to determine your roles and knowledge base within your team, like who are your developers, who's marketing, who's going to handle your accessibility, stuff like that. You also want to assign an accessibility advocate to kind of bridge the gaps in knowledge and also to offer more effective lines of communication, both to the highest level and also to your lowest level. Another thing is to learn the basics of accessibility with resources like here at Accessible Web. We do have an academy that kind of runs you through the basics of accessibility. And our third point is the accessibility statement and user feedback form. At Accessible Web, we do encourage clients to complete the following prior to starting an audit. We do highly recommend creating an accessibility statement, highlighting your commitment to accessibility and what actions are being taken. It helps demonstrate that you're working on an audit and you're also committed to providing an accessible experience to all of your users. Another thing is allowing your users to give feedback about barriers that they experience is invaluable because it can help prevent legal complications down the line. Okay, so we've kind of covered the basics. And now we are going into the checklist of what all you need for a manual audit. So what do I need to perform a manual audit? So here's some tools and information required before actually starting your manual audit. First, you need a representative sample or your scoping to ensure you're testing frequently used components or pages. On the you will also need an automated scanner. It is the first stepping stone. A good example of an automated scanner is our ramp, and our accessible web platform has for accessibility testing and maintenance. You'll also need a method of recording your manual audit test and results. With Accessible Web, we do have our Chrome extension, which allows you to run through the test for a specific page and record failures as you go. Then you can export those workbooks into your manual audit grid and get a heat map type view of what your site is having, where you're having accessibility barriers. A contrast checker is always recommended so you can quickly compare two adjacent colors against each other. WCAG does define the specifics for contrast. For text, you need a 4.5:1 contrast ratio, and non-text contrast, which is a 3:1 contrast ratio. And having a contrast checker like Accessible Webs is handy to do a quick check on each combination with the eyedropper, or you can input a hex code, an RGB value, or HSL values. Next, you are going to at least need a screen reader. For Macs, there is a built-in screen reader called VoiceOver, and for PC users, Narrator is also available. Personally, I use NVDA as I use a PC. There are other assistive technology software out there, but it may be beneficial to test out different ones as each one brings a different capability to the table. Lastly, you will need to be able to reference the WCAG guidelines and resources. If you're using RAMP in our Chrome extension, we link directly to the WCAG success criteria and give descriptions and instructions for each test. It's important to note that WCAG is a flexible set of guidelines, so there is room for subjective interpretation. It goes back to the creative coding described on a previous slide. So there isn't one way to achieve success, but manual auditing is being performed to ensure that there are multiple paths to the same destination, rather than limiting a user to a single route. All right, so now that you've got your toolbox equipped, we are ready to begin your manual audit. All right, quick pause. Okay, so you've got your tools, the team is set, users are notified with an accessibility statement, and you're ready to start, but where do you begin? Manual audits don't require a strict start and stop point. There is no right way to complete a manual audit. You could simply go through the success criteria one by one, or you can do the more time-consuming tests first. It's up to you as the auditor and the needs of your team. We're going to discuss some easy tests to start a manual audit that don't require a lot of technical know-how. These are made easier with the use of our Accessible Web Chrome extension. An easy test is the image function and alt text test. Within the Accessible Web Chrome extension, these tests can be found within the Pictures and Images section. So you want to go through and identify all images, logos, graphics, or icons within a page or widget and determine if they are meaningful or decorative. If there are meaningful images or graphics, such as images with information, say like on a sale, do you have the appropriate alt text that describes that, or is the information somewhere else on the page? I do want to make a note about functional icons. Like if you have a settings button that is represented with a gear icon, in that situation and similar situations, the button is taking the center stage with assistive technology with the appropriate accessible names or instructions, and the image itself should be considered decorative. Adding an alt text to that image becomes redundant and creates additional information for assistive technology to read out. By leaving the image as decorative, the focus is on the button and its function rather than the image itself. Moving on to our next easy test is non-text contrast. It can be a little time consuming, as if your web page has a lot of components and lots of different colors. It definitely can take up a chunk of time, but it's something that I find it relaxing. So the Accessible Web Chrome extension can help identify all of your UI components And then you can use the contrast checker to make sure that it's reaching sufficient contrast ratios, which you will, for non-text contrast, you want to be reaching that 3:1 contrast ratio. You also want to ensure that the contrast is met for all of the components' interactive states. So it could be an active state or a hover or your focus state. There are methods to making this component stay in that state within the DevTools, or you can do print screen. And personally, I use both methods when I'm auditing. So there's no right or wrong way. A big non-text failure that I frequently see is that whenever you have a form, the border of the input fields sometimes don't reach that 3:1 contrast ratio. All right, the last easy test I'm covering is headings. So a heading describes the content that comes beneath it and usually stands out due to its size or emphasized or bolded state. Look at your page and identify things that look like headings, and then using the Chrome extension tool under the headings test section, see if they are properly coded as headings. If you see text that looks like a heading, but it's not coded as a heading, you can flag that within the missing headings test. Headings also act as a quick way to navigate through a page with assistive technology, like a screen reader. Within NBA, all you have to do is hit the H button, and then you'll go down the headings on a page. Okay, and we are going to wrap it up with keyboard tab navigation testing. The last easy test, I'm sorry, completely lost my place. Okay, the 2.1.1 keyboard success criterion is a great test to start a manual audit, as it's easy to do, but it's a little bit harder to fix. So keyboard navigation is essential to most assistive technology, and if it's not identified, can cause many barriers for users. The keyboard function test is completed by going through your pages using keyboard alone, removing the use of a mouse. Can you access every interactive component on that page? You can use the accessible web Chrome extension to help identify what is being reached in a keyboard with a keyboard and what is not. To get started, I've included a couple of keyboard navigation basics, such as if you're moving your focus forward through a page, you're going to be using the tab button. And if you want to go back, you add shift and continue tabbing backwards. Another one is spacebar is typically used to either check or uncheck radio buttons or check boxes. Also, if you're navigating within like a table or radio groups or a select element, using the arrow keys should work. Also, enter key will execute a link or activate a button. And if you are within a dialog modal or a widget, the escape key should be able to exit you out. All right, I have run over just a little bit, so moving on to how can accessible web help? I have mentioned, and Gianna and the rest of our salespeople can hop in on this, but I've mentioned RAMP as well as our Chrome extension tool, our contrast checker, and there's Gian. Okay.
Yeah, I was happy to take over. So if you join us regularly, as you are well aware, we offer a comprehensive range of accessibility tools and services. So Accessible Web Ramp is our kind of hub of a platform where you can manage all of your automated and manual accessibility efforts and document accessibility progress over time. We also offer manual audits as a service, including VPAT reports and ACR, which is the context for a VPAT report. In addition to consulting and training and ongoing accessibility partnership, we are here to get you where you need to be accessibility wise. So if you have a specific accessibility project or need for tooling that you'd like to discuss, we would love to have a conversation about it. We are readily available, so please reach out to us either on offline or via email, and we're pretty easy to get in touch with on our website. So we're here to support you however we need to.